With its emphasis on tablet PCs and the new touch-optimized start screen or modern UI, formerly known as Metro UI interface, Windows adds a lot of new features that make it competitive in the tablet market in a way that it has never been before. On the other hand, most Windows users do not have tablets. Certainly if you're going to be upgrading to Windows 8, if you had Windows 7 or a previous version in the past, chances are you're using a traditional desktop or laptop with a keyboard and either mouse or trackpad interface. Assuming that's the case, assuming you are using a mouse and keyboard, the question then becomes, is Windows 8 a good choice for you? Or more specifically, what changes in the interface, the traditional desktop interface, has Microsoft made that are going to impact how you use Windows? Chances are, if you've looked into Windows 8, if you've read any of the reviews, if you've looked around online, the first thing that you've run into, or certainly the biggest thing, is the large number of complaints over the loss of the Start button and Start menu. With that in mind, it's certainly not hard to understand why people would be upset by the loss of the Start menu. You could argue that this is the biggest change that Microsoft has made to the Windows interface since Windows 95, when it became an operating system instead of simply a GUI to add on top of DOS. Despite all the complaints about it, for many people it is actually a welcome relief. For a lot of people, the Start menu, while perhaps convenient as a central location to find things, had gotten so cluttered that actually finding things on the Start menu once you got there was more trouble than it was worth. In fact, you might argue, certainly some people would, that if there's a problem with removing the Start menu, it's not so much that the Start menu is gone as the fact that it's not really replaced with anything particularly useful on the desktop interface. In this video, what we're going to be taking a look at is where all the things from the Start menu went. After all, those features are still in Windows. They're simply located in other places or accessible by other means. Rather than making an argument one way or another whether you should like or dislike these changes, whether it's a good or bad thing, I'm going to simply focus on where you can find the features now so that you can make that choice for yourself. Once you have that information, you can decide for yourself if these changes are too radical, if they make Windows 8 too unusable for you for a desktop or laptop computer, or they may simply make you decide that you need to do what many people are doing and download and install a third-party program that adds a Start menu back in, or similar functionality. In fact, some of these programs will actually add other features into Windows that aren't even there in Windows 7 that you may prefer to the actual original Windows interface. Whatever your decision, the point is, it's important to know where to access the features that used to be on the Start menu so you can make that decision for yourself. The first thing we're going to be looking at is where exactly all the old program shortcuts went to from the Start menu. That was, after all, the initial reason or primary reason for the Start menu to exist, to provide a list of program shortcuts. Now obviously without the Start menu, that list is gone, or more accurately, it is actually moved. Now even though you don't have a Start button, you do have, if you put your mouse pointer down in the lower left corner, a shortcut, an icon that takes you to the Start screen, and this is our modern UI. So this is the tablet-oriented interface. Now we have our app tiles here, and an app is something that runs in the modern UI. Now, a tile can have live updated information, or it can be essentially a shortcut to an app. But alongside those, we have a special kind of tile here, which is just a program shortcut. In fact, literally what Windows has done is gone and pulled all the shortcuts out of the folders that make up the Start menu on previous versions of Windows. In other words, a program installs, it asks you if you want to put shortcuts on the Start menu, and it puts those shortcuts in special folders in a special location that Windows uses to build the Start menu from. Now in this case, it's using those folders to build these tiles on the Start screen. Now notice that unlike the Start menu, number one, there are no folders. A lot of programs, when they install multiple shortcuts. Maybe one's to a help file, or to the home page for the software, or maybe even an uninstall link. But in this case, what you've got is Windows going into those folders and attempting to pull out just the program shortcuts. So it's not going to pull out those links to uninstallers, to help documents, to web pages. It's going to concentrate on just what it thinks are the programs themselves. And generally speaking, it does a pretty good job of that. Now, of course, sometimes you need to get to those shortcuts. You may need to get to the help file for a particular program. It's not that you can't get to those other programs, just that they're not shown by default. What you can do, though, is right-click on this area for the Start screen that doesn't have tiles on it, and you can do that in between tiles, basically anywhere you don't have a tile highlighted. And then come down to the bottom and select All Apps. Now in the All Apps view, you have a representation of those tiles, but notice we don't have live tiles anymore. Our weather isn't being updated. So literally these are just basically shortcuts. But we also have, instead of individual tiles over here for our program shortcuts, we have these lists. So the lists attempt to categorize things by these all belong to a particular program. Now it may be that this was a program that actually had a folder full of shortcuts that it put in the Start menu, or this might just be a program that has multiple shortcuts that Windows simply recognizes all belong to that one program or suite of programs. In a lot of cases, this works more or less like the Start menu, aside obviously from having the more compact view where you have to expand a folder. Now in other cases, it's a little bit problematic. For example, for my Matroska tools here, you'll notice that we have this MKV Toolnix link, or list, and it has this entire list of what are essentially reference documents. But you'll notice MKV Extract, MKV Extract, MKV Extract, these all appear to be the same thing, and in fact they are. Or rather, they're the same document in different languages. So having the list in this format can certainly be a little bit more problematic, because do you really want to have to go past all those duplicate documents, most of which have nothing to do with your particular Windows install, simply because they're all in a list instead of a folder? That's up to you whether it's a problem, and it will depend on what programs you have. But notice something else here. Here we have a program called ImageBurn. It's a CD, DVD, Blu-ray burning program. Very common, very standard, very high quality. A lot of people use it. But you'll notice that in this list, we only have a README file. We don't have the actual executable to the program. There's no link to run ImageBurn. Now here's what's interesting. Let's go back to our other view. Once again, we right-click on that blank area, select All Apps. The ImageBurn shortcut actually shows up on the Start screen. So there's a few problems, at least initially, with Windows 8 and how it determines what shortcuts to show you. Presumably this is something that's going to get tweaked in some future update, if not before, in a perhaps Service Pack 1. So it's not perfect. It's pretty good. It's a little bit more work and a little bit more jarring than just grabbing something off the Start menu. For some people that's going to be a problem. For some people it may even be an improvement. For some people it may be nothing at all. Now while we're on the Start screen, we're going to look at a couple other things here that have to do with the old Start menu, and what we're going to start with is our Charms bar. Now the Charms bar, and this applies whether you're on the desktop or whether you're on the Start screen, you access by putting your mouse in one of the right corners, either top right or bottom right. Now if we go to Settings and we go to Tiles, and this particular setting you can only access from the Start screen, there's an option to either show administrative tools or not. Now notice this isn't a checkbox or a button. This is actually a touch interface control. It's essentially a switch. So I'm going to say yes. Now over here you'll notice that we have a bunch of additional options that show up. And these are our control panel and administrative tools, or some of them, that would have shown up on the start menu before. Most of the time I'm going to keep them turned off because honestly in this interface they make things more cluttered than anything else. But it does provide an additional way to get to more settings off the start screen. And the last thing that we're going to look at here for the moment, we're going to look at this identity area up here, and this shows my login name of Rich. And if you click on that, you can lock the computer or you can sign out. Now, this is an important point, and this is definitely one area where the modern UI is really given preference over the old desktop UI. If you're on the desktop, you can turn the power off. You can shut your computer down entirely without coming back to this modern UI. But if you want to log out of your computer, you can only do it from this interface. The power option, now keep in mind on previous versions of Windows you would have a power option which was also the log off option, the lock your computer option. Anything that involved locking, logging out, turning off your computer was accessible from that one area. It's now been split into separate areas, so if you look on the settings options here, we have this power option here. The power option is available from the desktop. It's also available from the start screen. But what's not available is the option to simply log out or lock your computer. So not only has the start menu been scattered to different areas in Windows, but some of the features on the start menu have been made so you can only access them from this start screen. It's a little bit of an inconvenience. Some people would say a lot of an inconvenience, but that's what you're going to have to decide for yourself. So let's go ahead and go back to our desktop. We'll click on this desktop tile, and keep in mind, by default when Windows opens up, the start screen is where you're going to be, so if you want to get to the desktop, you can use the Windows key on your keyboard, or you can select this desktop icon, or tile actually. If I were to try to briefly sum up the changes to the Windows desktop interface in Windows 8, the first thing that I would mention is that it has become more of a power user interface. By power user, I mean someone who is intimately familiar with the more advanced options available in Windows and tends to use features that the typical user may not even know about. Now, there's nothing that's more of a power user feature than the context menu. Context menu would be a menu that you get by right-clicking on whatever in Windows. For example, if I right-click on the desktop, I get some screen options. If I right-click on a desktop shortcut, I get a different set of options, and that's the context. Depending on the context of where you click, you will get a different menu of options. In fact, there is a start menu still in Windows 8. It just isn't the traditional start menu. In fact, it is now a context menu. So if we come down here to where we see our start icon, and keep in mind you have to get all the way down there. If you right click here, you get a context menu for the taskbar. But if you come all the way down to where you see this start icon, you right click and there's a different menu. Now on this menu are actually many of the things that you might have traditionally seen on the start menu. And let's take a look at some of them. Number one, there's the run option. Now the run dialog, and this is certainly something that I would consider a power user feature, and in fact by default on Windows 7 for example, it doesn't even show up on the start menu. But if you're going to do something like, say, editing the registry, typically you're going to start that by opening the run dialog. Go ahead and get rid of that. Now the next option here, and we're going to look at this in a second, is the search feature. Now search does not work in Windows 8 exactly the way it does in, say, Windows 7. And we're going to look at the differences here in a second, but this will bring up the search option, which is going to be on our charms bar that we looked at earlier that you access on the right side of the screen. But for the moment we're going to leave that alone. We have a File Explorer option, and this is the old My Computer, Windows Explorer, the list of drives, list of folders. We have a Control Panel shortcut, so you can still open the Control Panel pretty easily from this same spot. We have our Task Manager, which shows us the list of running programs and apps. We have two more options here, definitely something which can be important, certainly for power users, and that is a command prompt and an admin command prompt. Now the command prompt is our old traditional, what many people refer to as a DOS prompt. It's not really DOS anymore, but this is how we would use the old keyboard interface, the text interface, to our operating system. Now what's definitely important there is that it includes an admin command prompt. Now what that means is that the command prompt runs with administrative privileges. If you've used the last couple versions of Windows, you should already be familiar with the new permissions model, where by default most users do not have administrative privileges. Now some users can't even do anything that requires administrative privileges, but if you are an administrator level user, if you want to, for example, install software, you have to do that using an elevated level of privileges called administrative privileges. Likewise, a lot of things that you might want to do from the command prompt, in fact, typically most things that require doing from the command prompt are things that you would want administrative privileges for. So there's a separate shortcut that will get you those privileges. Now beyond that, we have some control panel shortcuts. So while we can get to the control panel here, we can get to a specific area of the control panel, a specific control panel applet as they're called, from one of these options, such as Programs and Features. That's where you would uninstall software from or add or remove Windows features. Power Options, this would set your power management. Or System, this is what's known as the System Control Panel. Other things, Device Manager, Event Viewer. Now this is a separate interface as well. This is what's known as the Microsoft Management Console, something that was added all the way back in Windows 2000, and certain administrative functions are performed from there. Or we have the Computer Management option. This basically is all our standard Microsoft Management Console options, which duplicate some of the functionality of the control panel, not all of it. Let's go ahead and open that up real quick. So here you'll see that, for example, we have our disk management. We also have Device Manager. This is sort of a hybrid between the control panel and our management console. And we can actually add other functions to this computer management console, but we're not going to look at that right now. That's way beyond the scope of this video. The point is that we actually have a lot of our start menu functions right here on this new start menu, the context-based start menu. The last area that we're going to be looking at is going to be our charms bar, which once again we access by putting our mouse in either the upper or lower right corner. Now there are several options on here that we want to take a look at. We've got the search feature here, and we're going to start with that. Now just like on Windows 7, Windows Vista, you may want to search for a program instead of digging for it through a menu. Obviously the start menu is gone now, but let's say, for example, you wanted to find Notepad. So you could click on Search. Now notice we're being taken to the modern UI. Not exactly to the start screen, because notice we have this alternate view which shows us a bunch of apps. It shows us a bunch of program shortcuts. So let's say I want to find Notepad. This essentially works just like the previous versions of Windows, where you can type in the name of the program you're looking for or the file you're looking for. Windows will search through an index of files and programs that it has made, and it's going to find you Notepad in this case. So just like in previous versions, you then click on that. It's a shortcut essentially, and it's going to take you right back to the desktop and run that program. Now once again, this is a little bit jarring going from one interface to another, but unlike with, say, finding a program through the menus, this isn't quite as difficult. It certainly doesn't take more steps because you're going straight to the search options, straight to the list of programs and apps, and it will bring you straight back to the desktop when you run this desktop program. And of course, you don't necessarily need to go back to the start screen to find all those programs if you don't want to, because you can just come here once you've run the program once, right click, and pin the program to the taskbar. So it certainly has options that help you avoid using the start menu or the start screen. But of course the other side of that too is, what if you want to find Notepad? What if you weren't going to search for Notepad? You know where Notepad would be in the start menu, so you come back here, you go to your start screen, and you notice in that list of icons, not only are those administrative tools and things of that nature gone, but also the Windows built-in programs like Notepad or the calculator, little programs like that that you might use on a regular basis, those are also gone here. So in order to find those, we have to right-click, go to our All Apps view, and come all the way over here where we find all those other options like the sound recorder, like remote desktop connection, like Paint, the calculator, and Notepad. So the interface has definitely gotten a little bit more complicated. Whether it's an issue for you or not is something you're going to have to figure out on your own. And the last issue, the last place that we're going to find things, is on our settings, once again on the Charms bar. Now you'll notice when we come over here to the Charms bar, we have some familiar options, some of which are even on the new Start menu. So we have our control panel, we have personalization, which is mostly display settings, but once again that's a specific control panel, just like we find some of those on the new Context Start menu. We have PC information, that's actually back to our system control panel. We also have our help option. Now this is one of those things where you'll notice some of these settings, some of these different options are available from multiple places. In this case, the help option that was on the Start menu before is only available from the Charms bar. Now one nice thing about the help option though, unlike say the search feature, unlike the program shortcuts, this doesn't take us to the start screen. It doesn't require us to use the modern UI. The search interface for our help is going to be different for Windows 8 than it was for different versions of Windows, but it's at least on the desktop. Let's go back to our settings. Now down here we have some different options, once again mostly stuff that was available on the Start menu, some stuff that's actually duplicating functionality from say the notification area. So for example, we have our network information, shows that our network is connected, and that's essentially the same as we see down here in our notification area that's actually been with Windows as far back as Windows 95 and NT4. We also have our power option. Now that's one of the things that definitely was a standard feature for the Start menu and really has been since the beginning. We have on the power menu, unlike previous versions, we no longer have an option to log off or to lock our computer. And once again, just like I mentioned earlier, you have to go to the Start screen to find those options. We do, however, have our shutdown and restart options here, our true power options. Now the last thing we're going to not take an in-depth look at, but just pay attention to the fact that it's here, is a PC settings option. This is actually going to once again take us back to the modern UI. This is actually an app that in part duplicates functionality from the control panel, that in part adds new features to Windows that weren't there before, but generally provides a tablet-friendly way to adjust your settings. Now, pretty much everything here, not everything, but most of the features here can be accessed through our traditional control panel or Microsoft Management Panel or Microsoft Management Console programs. But once again, this is something that instead of being a program that's running on the desktop, this has once again dragged us sort of into the tablet interface. So in order to get back to the desktop from here, the easiest way to do it is going to be to go back to our start screen and then go back to the desktop. Chances are all these changes are going to be jarring and perhaps disruptive to the way you use Windows. But the good news is that doesn't necessarily mean Windows 8 won't work for you. In fact, there are some third-party programs, the most popular one probably being the free Classic Shell program, which can bring back the start menu and in fact make some other tweaks to the Windows interface. In fact, what you may find, and certainly this is true with Classic Shell, is that you can customize Windows in ways that Microsoft has not enabled for a very long time, and actually make it more comfortable than all the previous versions you've used. Of course, those same options, in Classic Shell at least, are not specific to Windows 8 necessarily. You can run Classic Shell with Windows 7 and make most of the same tweaks. So the question you need to ask yourself, and it's really best to ask after you've started using Windows 8, after you've tried it out, after you've decided for yourself how these changes impact your daily use of your computer, is whether Windows 8 is worth the customization you may need to do, whether losing the start menu even matters to you, and whether there are solutions out there that fit your needs and maybe even make Windows a better operating system for you than it has been in the past.